Okay, team, got another great question. That's how do I pace myself during a race? And I think I always tell runners all the time, you want to minimize the amount of stress and running any further than you need to in the race. Pacing is absolutely vital. I think for some runners, you can set a new personal best with a positive split where you run the first half far more aggressive than you run the second half. There are pros and cons to both positive splits and negative splits. A negative split is running the second half of your particular race faster than you run the first half. Okay, when I set my PRs practically in every event, from the 5K on the roads all the way up to the marathon, I did a positive split. I ran far more aggressive and had the luxury, if you want to call it that buffer. Because I went out so fast, I was able to slow down somewhat in the second half and still set a new personal best. But I think a lot of runners are having a hard time setting a new PR because either they're running far too aggressive, they're going way too far into oxygen debt in the first half of the race, and they're significantly slowing down. Another common reason for this is, again, it's how you're setting up your training for your race. Look at your training. If you're running too much aerobic mileage and you're not running enough anaerobic mileage, that's a reason. You have to train the body to be able to clear lactic acid more effectively, more optimally. You want to run confidently in the race to be able to handle that higher amounts of lactic acid, but because you perhaps for a common problem you're having is, one, your pacing is improper. You're going way too fast too early in the race. But again, you have to look at the training. How did you set up your did you do an 8-week block of training and you were training for, say, a half marathon or a marathon? And maybe that's 2 months. It's just not enough. Okay? I always tell runners, if you're training for the half marathon or marathon, give yourself an absolute minimum of 16 weeks. Look at 20 to 24 weeks if you really want to do it right. Okay, and I have training plans on RunDreamAchieve.com I've created for athletes that are training for longer races, maybe the 10-mile, 5K, or 10-mile, half marathon. I also have athletes that are training for the mile, the shorter races, the mile, the 5K, but you don't necessarily need to train for 16 weeks to 24 weeks for races at those distances, but there are options, so definitely consider that. How do I pace myself during a race? Okay, common question I was asking myself as well. You all look at the goal race pace that you're trying to hold and think, okay, how can I use leverage to do this? How can I accomplish this time goal that I have and minimize the amount of stress and physiological, stress I'm placing on myself, mental stress I'm placing on myself? If you're going to do a positive or a negative split, you have to be confident in your training. You have to make sure that, hey, if I'm going to go out far more aggressive in the first half, I have to know that I'm able to hold that and go out fast in that first half, but also be able to still sustain an aggressive pace in the second half, slowing down. Okay, there's no perfect answer here with this, okay? Because I know for a lot of athletes, going out a negative split is a little bit more intimidating. You go out a little bit more conservative, and then you have to really, turn the screws and really punch that second half and run faster in that second half. But I think for a lot of runners, it's just a natural, you feel much more confident going out a little bit more aggressive. And then if you're going to slow down the second half, you just know that, hey, I'm going to stay in this pack. Everybody else is going to slow down somewhat, and I'm going to stay in that pack. Or I'm going to make my move in the second half, and even though I'm slowing down, I'm still going to be able to hold that a somewhat competitive effort in that second half if I do a positive split, okay? And I think back to the California International Marathon. When I ran my PR for the marathon, I had a lot of ups and downs trying to get the marathon right. But on that particular day, everything went right up until the last 5K when I really started to hurt. But I did a positive split. I went out the first half in that marathon in 1:07:09, and I came back the second half in 1:12:26. Okay, so in terms of my own pacing, I don't think I would have ran 2:19 that day if I went out the first half in 1:12:26. And to come back with a 1:07:09, it's just, I think that it plays with us or psychologically as well. When we go out much more conservative, I mean, if you have that capability and you can go out much more conservative in the first half and really ramp it up and increase the intensity of the pace the second half, kudos to you. Because I know a lot of runners do set personal bests with doing a negative split. They go out much more relaxed, much more conservative in the first half, and then they're able to really ramp it up and run much faster in the second half. But me personally, I had a tendency to run far too aggressive. Even looking back to my running the 1600 in high school, I would go out way too fast. I mean, I still ran reasonably competitive times, but it wasn't an overnight process, okay? So I'm not saying this to gloat or anything. Trust me, I got beat so many times in high school. Starting off as a 5:30, 1600 meter runner, I ended up graduating with high school with a 4:25. So going from 5:30 for 1600 to 4:25 was an enormous amount of work. So as you all know, this great results in middle to long distance running do not come overnight. We don't get to the next level in racing by just being lukewarm about it. You have to make sure that you are all in, you're amped up, you're motivated, you're thinking long term. But my problem was I would go out way too aggressive, and that carried on even to my running as a professional. I set PRs, but I set PRs by doing positive splits, not negative splits. It was the same when I ran 4:25. You know, I ran the first 400 anywhere from 60 to 61. If I would have just, especially with the 1600, if I was a little bit more conservative in that race, I think maybe I would have ran maybe around 4:17 or 4:18 for 1600 meter as a senior instead of 4:25. But we always can go back and look at things that worked for us and things that didn't work for us. But if you are not getting the results that you want, maybe change up your tactics. Maybe be a little bit more conservative in the early stages of your race and pick up the pace. Okay, if a negative split is not working for you and you've tried it in the past, then start considering a positive split. And more than anything, sometimes both of these particular strategies don't necessarily always guarantee you results. Okay, so the main thing is to keep in mind in terms of your pacing is practice, 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 and training. Okay, if you have a goal race pace, if you're trying to break, say, I don't know, 2 hours for the half marathon, you know that's 9:09 mile pace. Okay, so you have to get that 9:09 mile pace or 5:41 kilometer pace to feel more manageable for you. So you have to do training down toward 8:20 mile pace or down toward 5-minute kilometer pace. Okay, if, like I mentioned earlier, if too much of your training is too aerobic, and you look at the percentages, okay, say I'm doing 90% aerobic and 10% anaerobic. Maybe the problem is the reason you're not getting the results you're wanting in the race is it's the training setup that you have, okay? And I certainly had to adjust as well over the years, okay? My problem earlier when I started running marathons in 2002, I was trying to run under 2 hours and 22 minutes, which was back then an 2008 Olympic trials B standard time, the minimum time standard that you needed back then to qualify for the Olympic trials. But I was a 2:43 marathoner in my debut. So I was like, how do I make this massive jump from 2:43 to 2:21:59? That's a huge drop in time per mile or per kilometer. The mistake I was making is I was running too much of my long runs too slow. Okay, you don't go from 2:43 to 2:21:59 by running long, slow runs all of the time. Okay, you have to alternate. It's what I always preach. One weekend you do a very paced long run. The next weekend you do an easy, relaxed long run. So you adapt. So you don't just keep pushing the body hard, because you cannot keep doing that and get high returns on your investment. You have to adapt to the training. So you have to have that, encompass that same amount of discipline that you have to run fast, also on the days to run slow and back off. Be smart. Check your ego at the door. Okay? I promise you, if you do that, if you practice your pacing and training, and you spend a significant amount of time running well below your goal race pace, you're going to be able to not only have that confidence to pace yourself more properly in the race, but to also handle and get to the finish line in your goal race, whether it's a positive split or a negative split. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's pros and cons to both of these. Find out what works best for you, and I promise you, you're going to set yourself up for success, and you are going to set a new personal best. So if you have any other questions regarding pacing, feel free to leave me a comment below, or anything else that's on your mind. I'll definitely respond back to you. Check out the resources below or on in the description, or on RunDreamAchieve.com if you're looking for a new PR. And I wish you guys and gals all the very best in your training, and I'll talk to you all in the next video.